Good evening all, and welcome. Public transportation for many is often necessary. Such is the case for riding the bus, where you can meet plenty of interesting characters, albeit maybe not all of them as savory as we may like. Tonight I have the pleasure of being joined once again by Sinful's horror stories. Truly a tour de force in our community. When you're done here, please be sure to go over to his channel and check out the collaboration we have over there as well. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. When I was in 8th grade, I went to a charter school, and my sister, who is 6.5 years younger than me, went to the same school. It was kindergarten through to 8th. Now, because it was a charter school, it didn't have school buses, so my mother would always drive us to and from. We have schools nearby that use buses. However, one of these was the country early college, which would bus people to a community college in the area. This meant that the buses for the early college would travel much further and even occasionally spend time on highways. This is important for the story. We were on our way to school one morning, and we were just coming over a hill, as we live in the mountains, and I noticed something immediately. The moment I saw what was in front of me, I was already asking my mother, "Is there a school bus going through that building?" She started to tell me no, but then she saw it. The early college bus had gone through the wall of the country store that was across the street from our school. In the parking lot, a parked truck had been crumpled, and in the middle of the street, a car had been struck. I'm never going to forget what I saw that morning, and thank God my sister wasn't looking. I can remember so vividly. The accident must have only happened. No emergency vehicles had arrived, and there was a man in the car. I remember seeing him draped across his steering wheel, arms hanging lifelessly out the window, and I remember the blood. Later on, I learned what happened. The man had been drunk driving at 7 a.m. and had been swerving. The bus driver had attempted to swerve out of the way, but had struck the car anyway and lost control, hitting the parked pickup and going through the building. Luckily, the worst injury on the bus was a case of whiplash. The man, however, was killed on impact. I also learnt that it had been his young daughter's birthday. Honestly, the story doesn't even end there, though that was the worst of it. A year later, I was attending the early college, and I was on the bus with several of the students who had been in that first wreck. One morning we were leaving our base high school to the early college, and a car came racing up a narrow road on the wrong side. The driver had two options. He could hit the car or he could swerve, and the bus would go through a house. He chose to hit the car. The passenger side crumpled inwards, and the front bumper came completely off, but the driver of the car and his girlfriend, who had been in the passenger seat, were all right. I think the girlfriend was just bruised up a bit, but that's all. The students on our bus, however, that was another story. I have PTSD from just witnessing the first crash, but many of the others have had to live through it. They had to send all of us home due to the panic that set in. It was horrific.
During university, I had a whole slew of creepy encounters. This has stuck with me the most. It started during my first class. One day a group of us were walking together along campus, and slowly members began branching off. It ended up as just myself and a guy who I was not inclined to befriend. Only knew his name, but I didn't want to be rude and not keep walking along with him. He asked me where I'm going, and I tell him I normally take a nap between classes and was going into my dorm. He asks if he can see my suite. Normally this would be a no-brainer red flag, but my particular building was renowned for being fancy, and others frequently asked to see inside of it. I say sure, not wanting to be mean and thinking this guy will take a quick look around and give the typical jealous comments and then leave. We go inside and I show him the basics, doing so in a way that we ended up back at the entrance of the suite. This whole time he's not saying much, and I'm only announcing things dryly, so I was confident when I said a quick, "It's pretty nice, see you around," that he was going to take to leave. I turned around and went to my room. I did not show him any rooms or say where anyone stayed. A few moments later, as I'm sitting my stuff down, I turn around, and there he is in the doorway. He's silent. I did not say anything because I did not want to invite him in. I wanted him to go. I just look at him, then start picking up stuff and moving it around, trying to look busy. He slowly walks a couple steps into the room and asks, "Have you done the coursework yet?" I told him no. By this time I assume he is trying to hang out, and tell him again that I'm planning on napping. He doesn't even skip a beat and says, "That's okay. I can watch you sleep and help you with it after." A smile, no tone, then silence again. I immediately tell him he needs to leave and follow him until he's gone out the locking doors, and I know he can't follow me back in. I told a lot of our friends about this, and they were heavily creeped out and made a point not to leave us alone again, ever. We finished the year out and I haven't thought about this guy in a long time. I did not know anything about him at all, and I still only knew his name. Flash forward a year and some change to the next summer, when I'm taking a bus ride home from a different part of campus. We get to one of the points where the bus stops and waits until a certain time before it can leave again, and everyone else that had been on the bus gets off at this stop. At this point, the driver starts talking to me, asking a lot of questions. I did not think anything weird at first, and answered what I thought were idle chat questions. So which apartments are you in? And what classes are you taking? Then, as more and more questions just kept coming, I started to feel uneasy with his mannerisms and became extremely vague in my answers. I still don't know if he was always intending to tell me this, but when he stopped peppering me with questions, he began spilling a story of how his son was in my math classes the previous year, and he knew all about me. He then started giving me a lot of family details. It's at this point that I realized his son is the guy who wanted to watch me sleep. All the details fit, but I had to know for sure, so I asked if his son is called Name. He smiles yes. He then mentioned how he would like to start riding bikes with me, and would I ride bikes with him and his son. I was gathering my stuff by this point and had decided to get off the bus. There are 2 doors, one at the front and one halfway, which was closest to me. The door stays open while the bus is at these stops, so people can hop off and on, and the driver normally gets off and takes a break. As I'm getting my stuff and getting up, the halfway door is shut. I look again at the driver, an older man but much larger than my petite frame and build. He is now standing facing me, but the front door is still open. He asks again, "Will you ride bikes with us?" I want off the bus and think the only way is to pacify him. I say yes and make my way to the front door, not knowing how to get around him. He looks pleased but asks where I'm going. I try and tell him I've decided to walk home, but he still blocks my way and tries to talk me out of it. I'm firm in that I want to walk from here, but he will not move. I'm standing in front of him wishing to move, but my body is frozen in place. Slowly he decides, "Give me your number and then I'll let you go." I really don't want to do this, but I also want off this bus immediately. My first thought is to give a fake, but I'm so glad I didn't as he immediately dialed the number. It was a test. Seeing my phone ring and watching me save his contact, he moves enough that I slide by and make it off the bus. After making it home, I go to block his number and already have multiple missed calls, and a voicemail of him just breathing. The situation was reported, and I did not see him on a route for a long time. But around a year later, I was getting on another bus and noticed he was back. I've never covered my face and backed off of public transit faster. Let's never meet again, father or son.
I work in New York City and live in New Jersey. As I was going on my way to take the bus by Port Authority, I saw a bus that was closer than the usual bus I take. The bus driver was outside bringing people into his car. It had the same shape. It was a street away, and it was parked on a different side of the road. I thought it was odd, but I just wanted to get home. As I get in and sit down, I realize this bus is odd. It didn't have the usual stickers or markings or any lights like the usual buses do, and it's tiny. I realize this bus is fake. Just as I realize this, a guy comes running up the bus saying, "It's fake, it's fake." That's when I knew my hunch was right, and an older woman and I tried to get out. But then the supposed bus driver, who's still outside, barricades the door. He puts his arms over the door and will not let us leave. So I told him to piss off and pushed him. Both the woman and I ran the hell out of there and onto the real bus. So jackass bus driver, let's never meet again.
This happened several years ago, when I was a naive 19-year-old university student. A bus company had just returned from being on strike, and as a special promotion, were letting people ride free for 2 weeks. I saw myself as adventurous and took this as an invitation to go randomly riding all over the city. One of my little adventures was a bit scary. I was at a bus stop in some random, unfamiliar part of the city. A man was next to me. We were the only ones there. I like to be nice to strangers and so engaged in conversation. Things escalated quickly. The man started telling me that he was some sort of crime boss and that he was aiming to kill a certain person. He said something along the lines of, "I don't like when I have to kill people, but when they cause trouble, sometimes I gotta do what I gotta do." I was afraid he would hurt me if I upset him, so I politely nodded along, as though what he was saying was completely ordinary. Lucky for me, his bus soon arrived. He got on Route 2 to a place called Pleasantville. To this day, I don't know if he was a legitimate gang member or just delusional. I'm not sure what part of the city I was in, nor do I know if he killed his intended target or anybody else. But to this day, I avoid Route 2 to Pleasantville.
This happened back in 2013, during my year in Australia. For reference, I was 19 and a small girl. I had to take a night bus and train from a smaller town back to Sydney. When I boarded the bus, the lights were on, and I saw that there were very few people. A lady with her daughter in the middle, and a middle-aged man, who was Indian, sitting near the back door. Maybe a few more people in the back. So I took my seat near the very front of the bus. As it was St. Patrick's Day, and I had been day drinking, back in the hostel I dozed off pretty quickly with my head leaning against the window. The lights were turned off, and I was expecting a good 2 hours sleep until the next train station. Wrong. I woke up. I'm guessing about half hour or an hour later, something had touched the back of my arm. I opened my eyes and was pretty confused at first, but then I understood that there was someone in the seat behind me, stroking my arm through the space between the seat and the window. At first I froze for 30 seconds before standing up and turning around. It was the Indian dude from the back of the bus. I gave him a solid WTF look as he was still trying to grab my hand from in between the two bus seats, like he was trying to get me to sit down so that he could keep harassing me through my sleep. Yeah, good idea. I grabbed my stuff and just went and sat as close to the bus driver as I could. Unfortunately, he didn't follow me. Must have gotten the hint, I guess. When we get to the train station, it was like a half-hour wait, and the guy sat across the room from me and gave me pervy looks the whole time, and I didn't get to sleep off my hangover that night.
So like one person before me said, they never thought about their bus driver until someone wrote about it. Well, the same thing happened to me. The thing is that this bus driver wasn't a school driver, rather an inner city bus driver, if that makes sense. So I was going to math instructions when I was 16, and they were in a different part of town. It would take me an hour by foot to get back to my apartment, so instead I opted for a 15-minute bus ride. I had been taking buses to my math instructor for a few times now, so I knew that the bus I was supposed to take was a 14. However, this particular day, I missed the 14 and got onto 14B. The 14B takes a detour as it is covering a portion of the outside city area. I didn't know that. I wanted to ask him where the bus would be going, but he seemed to be in a rush and just signaled me to climb in and stop asking. There was no one behind me, so I could have easily hopped off, but I was in a bit of a hurry, so I unfortunately got on and sat in the middle. I noticed immediately that the bus didn't take a turn for the city center, but rather for the hills, which I never even knew existed. So the bus is slowly getting empty, and I'm listening to my music, but I noticed the driver's occasional glances in the mirror towards me. We made eye contact a few times. I'm slowly panicking because I've never been to that place before, and I could literally see my whole town from the hilltop. My worst fear at that moment realizes when the last passenger leaves the bus. Now only him and I were left, and he turns around and asks me where I'm headed. I explained to him that I need to get off at the first station in my part of the town, and he grins kind of wickedly. I was panicking, my social anxiety over the roof. And this guy, who is about 40 to 50 years old or so, tells me to go and sit right behind him. I hesitated and he said, "Go on." I somehow scrambled out of my seat and sat behind him, and he started driving again. He kept saying something even as other passengers boarded, but I can't remember what exactly. I only remember him promising me someone would be waiting for me at the station. At that point I say I could exit on a different station, to which he replies with, "I'd rather you leave on that one." He finally gets to my station and I bolt out of it, not looking behind me. I later told the story to my best friend who lives in the area, and she told me he was always like that, and that I should definitely avoid ever getting on that bus again. So creepy old bus driver, let's never meet again.
This is from 2 years ago. I was 16, dressed in a short but fancy dress with makeup on. I'm clearly not a girl, but in fact, transgender. Quite obviously because I was pre-estrogen. I was waiting for a bus at school when I met him. I never got a name or even something I call him. At the time, I was in year 11 and had off periods in the morning, so it was a later bus. The man was talking to people around him the whole time while smoking. He offered me one before I got on. I really hoped he was going in the other direction, but he gets on my bus and sat next to me. He starts talking to a young couple with a newborn baby. I give them a look, and they start to ignore him as I'd been trying to, and they get off at the hospital, and I moved seats to sit where they were. He moved with me and sat right next to me again. Out of nowhere, he blurts out, "I just got out of prison for manslaughter and drug dealing." My immediate response was to panic internally. He then offered me marijuana and pills, and declined and said I was a soccer player, and they tested me frequently, even though I'm not. I felt an immediate uneasiness when he put his hand on my thigh and rubbed it. I sat there frozen until the bus stopped, and he let go. I ran for my next bus when I noticed he was following me, and got on the same one, and I found myself in the same situation. I noticed for the next few weeks he caught the same bus as me, but kept his distance. He was spotted around my school several times, and even outside my house by my mother. We moved shortly after, and I moved within walking distance of my new school. I still live in constant fear. I wonder if he knows where I live, or if he's still stalking me.
Here is something that happened to me 3 years ago, and sticks with me, especially when I'm out at night. I was on my way back home from a late night gym session. The gym is right next to my campus, but my flat was on the complete other side of the city, so I was definitely making sure that I caught one of the last buses. Otherwise, it was a long, long walk back. I got to the bus stop, and it was empty except for one older guy who looked pretty disheveled and out of it. Already this was setting off alarm bells in my mind, so I stood far away from him and began to wait. The bus tracker said that the next bus wouldn't be here for another 15 minutes. Damn it. Oh well, I put my headphones in and started listening to one of my podcasts to pass the time, so I definitely wasn't making sure that I got caught on the last bus. Otherwise, it was a long, long walk back. It should be noted at this point that I have dwarfism. I'm 4 foot nothing and about 80 pounds, and I'm used to unwanted attention. It was against my better judgment that I was even on this late, by myself in an unfamiliar part of town. I must have let my guard slip because I suddenly felt a hand on my shoulder, and the man was standing right next to me. Too close. I looked up at him and he was saying something to me, so I took my headphones out to hear him. You all right there, pal? I was saying I've never seen one of you before. He was swaying and grinning at me. I'm all right, thanks. What bus are you getting? I did not want to answer that truthfully, but there were only 2 buses left to come that night. I said it was the other one. He looked disappointed. I've always wanted to meet one of you. He stood there and stared at me for what felt like a whole minute. I felt his eyes all over me. Now I think I understand what women mean when they say they felt like a piece of meat. Eventually he said, "Do you have sex?" I've had some inappropriate questions from strangers before, but that took the biscuit. I should have said it was none of his business, but I found myself saying, yes, uncomfortably. He seemed to contemplate that for a while, amused by the idea. What's it like down there? I've always wanted to know. From his tone, he sounded excited. I took a couple steps away from him. This time I was more prepared. That's not really any of your business, is it? I was thinking about how long the walk would be back home. He was getting the bus I needed. I didn't know where the other bus went. Was it worth going through with my lie? I didn't know. I suspected that he would get on the same bus as me regardless. He took another step closer. This was the moment I actually got scared. He saw me step backwards and didn't care. He knew I was uncomfortable and didn't care. That means it's big, he laughed. I bet it does. I've always wanted to have sex with a midget. That was it. I wish I would have said screw off or leave me alone or something, but I was just too scared. I need to go, I blurted and walked as briskly as I could without running. It would take him no effort at all to catch up with me. I pictured him walking behind me with his much longer legs, but I didn't want to look. I walked for a couple minutes before I finally glanced back. He was still at the bus stop, but he had moved about 10 feet to stand at the edge of it. I could only see his silhouette against the light of the bus stop, but I could tell he was watching me. I turned around a corner street just to get out of sight. I walked the full hour and a half home, picturing him following me the whole way. Creeps me out to this day.
I was 18 at the time this happened. I had just graduated high school, and it was just my luck my car died when my adult life was supposed to begin. I live out in the sticks of Washington State. The next town over was an hour away from any employment or real civilization for that matter. I had to resort to taking the bus to and from anywhere I needed to go. I managed to find a job before a new college semester started, and near my work, the main bus stop was located right in front of a multiple department store. Being the main area for bus transportation, there was always a decently sized crowd of people coming and going for their connections. I felt safe enough in my environment, never being alone in that sense. On this particular day, there had been a larger crowd than normal. It was summer, and I had been seated with a book waiting on my way home. A cluster of people had been having a discussion to the right of me. Something comical happened in their socializing, and it made me look up from my book. I don't remember what happened, but I smiled at the crowd in acknowledgement at the funny, then looked around at the other people who had also witnessed the sight. Then, sigh. I made the big mistake. I'm not sure how I knew this was a mistake, but the feeling I had was one of annoyance and unsettlement, an encounter unwanted in my day. My gaze came across a tall man, standing alone and away from the others. I remember he had a patchy rat-tail moustache, oversized glasses, and salt-pepper hair. Our eyes met unintentionally, and somehow, that cued the okay for him to come over next to me, which I generally wouldn't have minded if this guy didn't immediately give off the creeper vibes when he began talking. First it was just a, "Hello, my name's Rick. How's your day?" I was polite enough to answer, already dumb with his presence. I turned back to my book, hoping to send the sign of bug off, but I knew better than to give this guy any important information about myself. He asked my name, and I replied, Rachel, a fake name. "Ah, what a pretty name," Rick replied, and then asked, "Are you in high school?" "Yes, almost done with summer school, and on my way to my summer study group." "How old are you?" "I'm 16. I really wanted to walk away with this answer at this point, and Rick stands up straighter. 16, huh? I don't reply, knowing this is going to turn weird. "Well, Rachel, I'm 32, have a part-time job, drive, although I don't have my own car, and I live with la. Rick carried on to tell me about his life, and relished in the fact on how he's single and ready to commit to a woman. Yeah. Rick then suggests that I could join him sometime at lunch, and made a few other suggestions for a date, but not asking outright, making it seem on friends' terms. I'm not that stupid. I am no longer looking at Rick, feeling creeped out and revolted at the fact that I had just told this 13-year-old grown man that I'm 16, and he's still trying to persuade me to go out with him alone. He tells me all this unwanted personal information about himself, and then he suggests a relationship? I drop my voice to a firm, cold, warning tone. That would be highly inappropriate. I am not interested. I say this loud enough to which people start taking uncertain glances in my direction. Good witnesses, if needed. Being noticed and rejected, Rick rocketed back and forth on his heels uncomfortably, then stated, "I think I'd be a good match for a woman like yourself." I stand up, and I'm fed up at this point, and I say, "No." And I walk a ways down as my bus pulls gently in on time. Rick never moved, only stared at me for another 3 minutes while the bus loaded in passengers. Thankfully, I had never run into Rick again after this encounter, but unfortunately, it would not be the last time I ran into a creeper like Rick. Apparently, in small towns of Washington state, if you're polite or even glance at someone in public, it means you're ready for a long-term relationship. 3 other times I've been followed. One guy even persuaded the bus in his car. I bought a vehicle soon after, and then moved to the city of Tacoma later on. The experiences didn't faze me, and I still took the bus occasionally. I even rode a bicycle up and down now Pack Avenue all hours of the day for a shorter commute. That would take too long for a bus, but would be a waste of fuel if I took a car, and I never seriously had any weirdo encounters like that again. So the lesson here is that it's true what they say about small towns. Small town, small world, small mind. Stay alter and stay safe.
I am female. When I was 10 years old, my family relocated from Delaware to South Carolina for my dad's job. We lived near all of our family and had never moved before. One of Dad's selling points about the move was that people in the South are so friendly. I had just finished 5th grade and would be starting 6th in South Carolina. I rode the bus to and from school in Delaware, and so there wasn't a lot of anxiety about riding the bus after we moved. 6th grade started and I was excited about my new school and loved my teacher. Dad was right. People in the South are polite and friendly. Well, most of them are. Anyway, one day in the fall I got off the bus at my stop after school, and a man in a dark green VW Beetle was behind the bus, pulled off the main road, and called out to me as I was walking towards my house. I turned around and probably even smiled at him. I had no real stranger danger fears at that time. I walked up to the driver's side of his car to see what he wanted. I figured he wanted to ask for directions or something, and I planned to tell him I just moved here and didn't know. But oh boy, he didn't need directions. He was after something entirely different. He smiled at me and said something I didn't catch, comprehend, or understand. So I said, "What?" or "Excuse me?" to get him to repeat it. I got a little closer so I could hear him better, and he said, "Do you want to have sex?" So at that time I didn't know what that meant, except that maybe I kind of did, and knew that it was a bad word. I didn't know what to do, whatever that meant. I turned and ran to my neighbor's house and didn't look back. I was crying and they called my mom and my parents came, and my parents called the police about it. A couple of days later, the police department had a sketch artist come meet my parents and I at the station to work with me. I did the best I could, but honestly, I wasn't studying the man's features or even trying to remember his face at the time of the incident, so I don't know how accurate it actually was. My parents and I thought that was the end of it. Nobody really thought they would find him. The cops were saying things like if they found him, he would go to jail for a while, for his obscene question to me. My mom was nervous that if it came to that, I would have to go to court and testify, and she didn't feel good about putting me through that. She was worried that even as an underdeveloped 10-year-old child, the defense would attempt to shame me in some way, or say I was asking for it. About a week later, I was getting off the bus and I hear a car horn beep. I looked to see it and it was the same guy, same VW Beetle, smiling and waving at me. I was stunned. I blankly waved back for some reason, but at the same time memorized his tag number. I repeated it to myself over and over as I ran to my house to write it down and call Mom. Cops were notified and the guy was identified. He lived 20 minutes away in another town. His local cops knew and were friendly with his family. The good old boy system. So he didn't go to jail, but apparently they told him to stay away from me. I never saw him again and I hope I never do. I wonder how many times he might have followed the bus and watched me that I never even knew about. Dear pedo pervert predator, let's never meet again.
I'm a sophomore in high school, and I go to a public school, which also means I ride a bus with the same people every day. Now that we have that out the way, let's begin. Last year, I got separated from my two best friends, and I was put onto a new bus route, compared to the amount of people that were on the bus I rode with in 8th grade. This one was practically empty. There were only about 3 high schoolers including me, and around 5 or so middle schoolers. Everything was going great, until I decided to venture to the back of the bus. I was, and still am, a very anxious and antisocial person, so that was a big step for me to take. As the ride continues and everyone gets on the bus, everything is perfect until our last bus stop. Let's call this kid Weasel. Weasel was also in high school. He didn't say much until about a week into school, and he would start asking us questions. They weren't all that weird at first. They started out as questions such as, "What's your favorite color?" or "Who do you look up to?" Flash forward to the start of summer sports season. Weasel and I didn't get along at all, due to how weird he had become. He had started cracking homophobic and racist jokes, claimed he was a Nazi, wanted to murder all women like Hitler would with the Jews, given all of us vulgar names, and threatened my life. And his questions had become more and more personal and offensive. Weasel and I were the only 2 high schoolers on the bus, leaving me alone with him for about 20 minutes until the middle schoolers were released. He would often twitch violently, say my name over and over, grunt, move seats to get closer to me. Within a week of enduring this, I was scared shitless of him. I ended up sitting up front for the rest of the year until the middle schoolers got on. Fast forward to present day, I found out that his brother had lit a public bathroom on fire and has a history of anger issues would be joining us on the bus. Luckily, the bus driver puts middle schoolers up the front of the bus. Weasel only talks about his brother, asks those offensive questions, threatens me and my friends, and spews homophobic and racist slurs. On the first day of school, he threw my earbuds out the window, cut out a chunk of my hair, and brought a dead raccoon onto the bus. I am terrified that this kid will try to hurt me and my friends, and I don't know what else to do. So Weasel, let's not meet again. Even though I have to every day until my best friend gets his license in December.
This happened last night as I was coming home from work. I'm a 23-year-old woman and I don't have a driver's license, so I take public transport or Uber a lot. I've had several people give me general bad vibes and make me feel unsafe. But this is the first time somebody has crossed the line from creepy to scary with me on my commute. I stayed a little later than usual at work yesterday because I'm trying to learn After Effects and I wanted to spend a little more time on the practice project I had going. I left the office around 5:45 and walked 10 minutes to the bus stop. The sun was going down, but there was still light in the sky. I didn't have to wait long for the bus. The driver pulled up and was very friendly as she scanned my ticket, which is on my phone. I took one of the seats that faces the inside aisle, which I prefer not to do, but it was the only place to sit where I didn't have to sit directly next to somebody who was already on the bus. Because, you know, I value personal space. After a few stops, we made a stop near the major university in my city. A young guy got on, probably younger than me, but not by much, and sat directly next to me. He smelled awful, but not as bad as some people I've encountered on the bus, so I didn't think to move or anything. Right away, he made a sound like, "Ha!" and I thought he was going to comment on the music in my headphones, but he didn't. He looked at my phone. "Are you on Facebook?" "I'm on Twitter." Never understood it. You ever sold anything on Facebook? I said no. He kept asking me weird questions like that, like he just wanted to talk to me and he didn't care what it was about. At this point, I figured he was trying to flirt and was just bad at it. So I politely answered his questions and tried not to be too friendly about it. He asked if I was a student, which I'm not, and whether I would rather live in a mansion or an apartment. Obviously a mansion, I told him. He said his goal was to have a house big enough to put a skate park in. That's a good goal, I said, thinking that this guy was probably not playing with a full deck, but not wanting to be an asshole about it. He said, "You're awesome." And he asked me, "Are you looking for a best friend?" I said no, that I have a best friend. We've known each other since we were 8 years old. And then, like it was so casual, he said, "And we've known each other since we were 8 years old." And then, like it was so casual, he said, "If you tell me where he lives, I could kill him." I didn't know what to say. I looked around for someone on the bus to intervene, but no one had heard what he said. So I just said, probably not." He laughed. "You smell good." I just put my headphones back on and tried to tune him out. There were no available seats for a couple of stops, so I just had to sit there with him talking in my ear. I couldn't hear him. I was listening to Pedro Fernandez as loud as I could. As soon as the seat opened up, I moved away from him to forward-facing seat and put my purse next to me in a defensive position. I started to get worried about whether this guy would get off the bus before I did. My destination was pretty far down the line, but I didn't need him following me home or even knowing where I usually get off the bus. What would have stopped him from waiting for me? I texted my roommate to pick me up at the Hooters halfway home. Right as I did this, he got off downtown. Unlucky for me because my roommate was busy and couldn't pick me up. Also, my childhood best friend is a girl. I wasn't about to tell him that, though. So creepy guy who wants to kill my best friend, take a different bus next time.
When I was in first grade, I rode the bus to and from school every day. There was a teenage boy from high school who rode the bus too. One day he asked me to sit with him and told me that he was asked to ride the school bus to help the bus driver keep the children orderly. I remember that he always wore a cowboy hat. Other than that, there were only young grade schoolers who rode the bus. He started asking me to sit with him every morning. He would bring me candy and give me quarters for the snack machine at school. He always told me how pretty I was, and how much smarter than the other girls my age I was as well. He would show me his paintings. They were always of beautiful women and mermaids, but they were always topless or nude. I thought that I was very grown up, because I got to see his racy art. This went on until Thanksgiving break that year. During Thanksgiving break, I went to visit a friend and had the best time. I remember having my mind blown because her mum had a laminating machine and laminated our drawings so that we could keep them forever. I got back home and thought everything was normal until Thanksgiving Day. Over Thanksgiving dinner, my mum angrily mentioned that I had a friend stop by while I was gone to my little girl's friend's house. Somehow, I don't know, I knew that it was the guy in the cowboy hat. The angry way she said it made me confused and ashamed, and I felt so awful that I couldn't finish my Thanksgiving dinner. Years later, I was speaking with my sister, remembering that day, and she told me something I never knew. The day I went to my little friend's house, the guy in the cowboy's hat came to my house in his car. He of course knew where I lived because he saw me get on the bus every morning. He knocked on the door, and my aunt who was babysitting answered. He asked for me by name, and when she asked me what he needed me for, he said he wanted me to take me on a date. My aunt was so angry, she chased him to his car and down the street, hollering that she'd kill him if he ever came back. Come to think of it, I never saw him on the bus again after that Thanksgiving break. So, Guy in the cowboy hat that wanted to take a first grader on a date. Let's not meet again.
Back when I was 15, I picked up my younger brother from elementary school every day, and we would bus home together. We had to transfer 2 times, and this happened at the same stop at the second transfer. One day I saw an old Caucasian man get onto the bus after us. He looked around 60 years old with white hair, and he was really large. Since there was no seats available, I stood up to offer my seat to him. He gave me a smile and thanked me. I thought nothing of it. After a few minutes, I noticed that he was still staring at me with a smile, and at that time I thought he was just appreciating the fact that I gave up my seat for him. After another while, I just started to get uncomfortable because I was noticing that maybe he had mental health issues, or he was just slow because of his age. I took my brother by the hand and we moved back towards the back of the bus. By the time our stop arrived, the bus was pretty empty. My brother and I exited, and we started walking in the direction of our apartment, which was only a few feet away from the bus stop. I was pretty paranoid from earlier, so I turned around to check if anyone had followed us off the bus. I saw the old man walking in our direction, and I internally panicked. I reasoned to myself that maybe he lived in this area as well, and it was just a coincidence that he was walking in this direction. So I kept walking towards the gate of my apartment. My brother and I got to the gate, and I was digging my backpack for my keys. Suddenly I felt a tap on my shoulder, and I looked up to see the old man smiling at me. I didn't know how to react, so I just said hello, and kept looking for my keys while I kept my eyes on him. By that time I was really creeped out, because his stare was so intense. He said thanks for giving your seat for me, and asked if I was free to go for lunch with him, so he could really thank me. In my head, all I could think was that it was around 4 o'clock. So why would he want to go to lunch? I quickly declined, shoved my brother past the gate and slammed it behind me. The old man just kept smiling and staring as I looked back, and I was glad that I was able to escape from him. A few days passed and I thought nothing more than the incident. Then one day I saw him again at the bus stop. I tried to stand as far away as possible and tried not to look in that direction. I could feel him staring at me, and I remember just wishing that that bus would come faster so I could get away. We got onto the bus and I could still see him smiling as he stared at me, unblinkingly out of the corner of my eye. I tried to keep my attention on the book that I was reading and not let it bother me. When our stop came, my brother and I quickly got off the bus and sped walked to the gate. I turned around to check if the old man had followed us off the bus, and was immensely relieved that he didn't. I looked at the bus as it drove past, and I remember seeing him by the window seat, just staring at me. For the next few weeks, he just kept showing up at the same bus stop. Sometimes I would see him sitting by a ledge, and when he saw us, he would get in line for the bus. Sometimes he tries to go up to me and initiate conversation. I always ignored him the best I could, and keep my brother on the opposite side of him with me in between. I was immensely glad that I lived in an apartment so he didn't know where we exactly lived. I never told my parents about it, and although I contemplated telling someone, I never did. Plus, there wouldn't be any evidence. I also thought that because he was an old man, he couldn't do much harm, and maybe he was just lonely. I just tried to put up with it the best I could, and stay as far away as possible from him. I also couldn't take another bus because the bus didn't come often, and we had to go to extracurricular activities afterwards. Then one day he initiated conversation again, and started telling me that he was a rich man. He showed me the gold chain around his neck, and the gold rings around his finger. I was mildly offended that he thought this would make me want to talk to him, so my brother and I went to a nearby supermarket to try to avoid him, and take the next bus. I thought that he would give up and just take the bus, so I wouldn't see him when I went back, except he followed us into the supermarket. I walked through a few aisles to try and lose him. After I couldn't see him anymore, I decided to buy my brother a treat to calm him down. We headed back to the cashier's area and lined up. Then I felt a tap on my shoulder and I saw the old man with the $20 bill in his hand. He offered to pay and I said no thank you. I think he said okay and just walked out. I didn't see him afterwards at the bus stop and thought that maybe he took the hint I wasn't interested in anything to do with him. Luckily, this happened a month or two before summer break, so I didn't have to take that bus route anymore. I also didn't have to go to extracurricular activities, so my brother and I took a bus at a different time. Fast forward a year, I was walking my brother to summer school every day during the summer. On that route, we walked past a subway stop. One day we saw the old man at the stop. We quickly walked away hoping that he didn't see us, but he must have seen us, because every day after that, he was sitting outside the subway stop. He didn't try to initiate conversation, but he was always staring intensely at me from afar. I started getting nightmares of him kidnapping me or taking a knife to threaten me. After a week or so, my brother and I just took a different route to school. I didn't see him again until last year. I saw him at the bus stop on my way to university, and my heart automatically started beating faster, and my hands became clammy. He must have seen me because he smiled and stared at me without blinking. Luckily, since my classes aren't a set schedule, he wasn't able to lurk at the bus stop again waiting for me. I still see him on rare occasion at bus stops around where I live, but for the sake of my sanity, old man, let's not meet again.
This happened about 7 or 8 years ago, when I was still in high school, being 16 or 17 years old. My friend and I would go to the mall after school on Fridays every once in a while. Neither of us could drive yet, so we would have to take the bus there and back. We would part ways at the transit center and take different buses home. I would be alone on the bus around 9 to 10, and it was pretty dark out by then. I would have a bunch of shopping bags, and my stop was one of the last ones, so there wouldn't be many people on there by the time I got off. Every time I was on my way home, I would always see this man staring at me, and he would give me a creepy smile. So I would try to get up really last minute to see if he would get off, and he would always wait for me to get off before he did. Then he would purposefully walk by me and smile creepily and wave at me, and I would just nervously say hi back and quickly walk or run to my house, since it was only about a minute away. One of the last times I saw him, I was really scared and went to the front of the bus when it was time to get off at my stop. There were 2 doors to get off the bus, one near the front besides the bus driver, and another near the back. I was more shy back then and was scared to speak up, so I kind of just lingered around the bus driver and didn't tell him what was going on. The bus driver just thought that I wasn't getting off, so he was about to drive off, but then at the last minute, I told him this was my stop. The bus driver was confused but let me go, and the creepy man proceeded to get off as well, which means he was lingering around seeing if I would get off at my usual stop. This time when he walked by me, he had a smirk on his face and seemed like he knew he was scaring me and was getting a kick out of frightening me. I never saw him again, and I no longer take that bus. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I want to give a huge thank you to Sinful's Horror Stories for collaborating with me in this video. He is an extremely talented narrator, as I'm sure you've figured out by now. And if you enjoyed his stories, please don't forget to go over and check out his channel and his videos. He's really talented, and I'm sure you'll really like his content, as I do. If there's a story that you wish to share, feel free to send it to my email or my Reddit. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off, and I'm going to leave the links to his channels in the description and at the end. So now, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.